The following monthly audio presentation for July, with a transcript included, was conducted by 7 directors, officers, and members in good standing of the Vaishnava Foundation. It is an interview with Kailāsa Candra dāsa recorded on June 27, 2026. Although 21 questions were edited for clarity in syntax, the contents and intention of each question was formed by those 7 inquirers. They are Bhakta Ernest Dras, Bhakta Sri Hari Vijaya Raghavan, Gokulananda, Hasyarati, Om Purnam, Sanatana, and Bhakta Alexander Peric.
I would like to first say that I'm very thankful to you, Prabhu, for your selfless, dedicated service to Śrīla Prabhupāda and the Vaishnava worldwide community. You're steadily preaching genuine spiritual truths and messages as they are given by Śrīla Prabhupāda and previous ācāryas. You're doing so without any compromise or biases, despite many obstacles which have come to pass after Śrīla Prabhupāda departed physical manifestation and entered Samadhi. From the spring of 1978, the genuine spiritual Vaishnava movement founded by Śrīla Prabhupāda has grossly deviated. It has been gradually watered down to the level of a new organized religion, a church, and a de facto ācārya. It functions in the name of pure devotional service, spreading mistaken knowledge related to Guru Tattva and the process to attain perfection in spiritual life. Despite all of that havoc, you remained a loyal disciple to Śrīla Prabhupāda, dedicated to his instructions and teachings, and continue to preach the absolute truth. Specifically, your 2 books, namely Beyond Institutional Gurus, Initiations, and Party Men, and the newest one, On Consciousness and Perfection of Man, are extremely helpful to distinguish between absolute reality and illusion. Thank you very much. Here is my question. When and how did you realize that the first 11 so-called Diksha Gurus were neither appointed by Śrīla Prabhupāda as Diksha Gurus, nor qualified for such service? What steps and what stand did you make after that realization that they all cheated about their alleged appointment?
This full realization did not take place for over 2 years because it could not be known immediately after Prabhupada departed. What was touted as an appointment tape was never transcribed, nor was the tape circulated. The tape was kept in a vault in Los Angeles by Rameshwar. Only 6 GBC men in Prabhupada's private quarters at Raman Reti, during the interview with him, knew of its contents. It was called, quote-unquote, the appointment tape, but it turned out to be something else. However, no one knew that until mid-1980. It contained no appointment of any guru or gurus whatsoever. That is a very long story and covered elsewhere in my presentations, as well as in my books and articles. The tape was pried out of the vault by 2 Devi Dasis at Los Angeles in 1980 when they pressured Rameshwar to give them the tape in order for them to listen to it for verification. Instead, their doubts were validated. One of these disciples, a very fiery woman who was a huge collector, read Rameshwar the Riot Act after she understood that she and the movement had been misled for over 2 years about what that tape was supposed to have proved. She was a heavy-duty preacher and determined to get the message out. She did so to a significant degree, but there was no internet at that time, and communication back in the day then was far more limited than it is today. She preached that the gurus were all bogus. This got her not only ostracized, but beaten severely. She eventually took shelter of a small group of devotees that YNS had linked up with in Buffalo in late 1978. By that time, my group was separate from his, but my men were still favorable to him. One of them called long distance to check up on him. YNS then revealed that the appointment tape was a hoax. As such, we stopped our activities in the lower Midwest and immediately traveled to Buffalo in order to listen to and discuss this shocking details. One thing was crystal clear. No one was appointed to the post of guru or spiritual master on that tape. It was supposed to contain conclusive evidence that Prabhupada appointed 11 spiritual masters in July of 1977 after that aforementioned meeting in late May of the same year in his private quarters, but it contained no such evidence at all. This was a major revelation. It became clear that the 11 appointments in July 1977 were only of Ritviks. Everyone in the movement, without exception, had been brainwashed into believing that Prabhupada appointed gurus, but he never did. As such, there was potential for a major shakeup. There was something in the air. This is when I first realized it. As per your question, I realized it in early November of 1980. What did I do about it? That would take a presentation in and of itself equal to the length of this one or more. I've done quite a lot. I wrote position papers. I circulated them. I held one meeting with other senior devotees in Kingman, Kansas in early 1981. As the years went on, I continued with my personal insurgency. I never stopped preaching this truth and pointing out the ramifications and repercussions integral to it. I took advantage of the internet in the mid-90s, well before most of my godbrothers got online. I incorporated the Vaishnava Foundation in early 1988 in Sacramento, California, after it had functioned for 13 months previously under the same title as an unincorporated entity. One of the pillars of my preaching is that the original 11 great enjoyers and deviants were never appointed by Prabhupada to the posts they usurped via a kind of smash and grab in the late 70s. I took a stand against all of them before the appointment that never was revealed itself to me at the beginning of the 80s. I upgraded and further empowered my resistance from time to time. None of my godbrothers have matched me in this connection, in no small part because virtually all of them were entangled in one of the three major deviations, namely so-called ISKCON, Neomut, and Ritvik, all of which I exposed early in my preaching, and I continue to do so. I have a large body of work. In due course, it'll become immense. It will continue to cover all of the bases and facts in granular detail. It will continue to expose the three great deviations that are parading themselves as part of Prabhupada's plan, although they are anything but. All of them are engaged in killing Krishna consciousness in the name of spreading it. So-called ISKCON opened the Pandora's box in no small part because its leaders hid the truth about the appointment that never was.
Your primary mission has been exposing the deviation that emerged in what only appears to be Prabhupada's movement, mostly after Śrīla Prabhupāda's disappearance. Against whom or what has your effort primarily been directed? Is it against the cult itself?
My effort is against any and all movements that have emerged as deviations from what Prabhupada ordered. You do not offer constructive criticism of a pseudo-bhakti deviation, as that only feeds it. The ISKCON movement that Prabhupada founded and developed in the 60s and 70s, it no longer exists. It can be compared, the situation can be compared to the creeper of devotional service. Such an analogy is apt on many levels. You have to till the garden and remove the weeds. If you do, the real creeper can grow, flourish, and produce fruit for those who then relish it. The genuine ISKCON movement was the creeper that got strangled by the weed of so-called ISKCON, which prevailed when it killed the real creeper. The ripened fruit of the essence of the Vedas is pure Vaishnavism. It is at the top of the tree of Vedic revelation. It is passed down carefully from branch to branch in order to be relished in an unadulterated form at the end. The spiritual science of Buddha Yoga, the Buddha Yoga process of devotional service, is delicate. It must be passed carefully from guru and disciple, as well as from a more advanced disciple to a new follower. It must be passed down as it is, without any change or adulteration. It must be passed down in truth, capital T, which entails complete honesty. As per this analogy, the truly spiritual movement functions in exactly the same way. When an imitation weed enters, which in the case of ISKCON it did in the mid-70s, and certainly including the plainclothes pick, when that imitation weed enters, it required that it was to be uprooted by the movement's leaders. It wasn't. Exactly the opposite took place. The imitation weed began to grow stronger as it strangled the creeper of Prabhupada's actual ISKCON movement. As to when the imitation weed prevailed, that can be debated. What was the death blow? Now remember, a death blow does not always produce immediate death, although it often does. Many would consider that the hijacking of the movement by the pretenders in the spring of 1978 was the initial shock, the death blow, to Prabhupada's branch of Hare Krishna. Once that die was cast, did the real ISKCON movement then cease to exist? Or did it still have a chance to recover? Did it continue what we may call and say to be on life support for a while? If you believe that it could have recovered, that a return to square one was still possible, however remote, then in continuing with this analogy, the ISKCON movement hung on until the mid-80s. However, the second transformation, led by Professor Blueblood and Natpa, required to engage in emergency surgery. It required a revolution. That never happened. And the chameleon imitation weed of the fabricated so-called ISKCON movement changed its shape and its colors, but its essence of deviation remained. The initial dishonesty was not uprooted, and the real movement was so emaciated by that time that it was taken off life support. This is one other view, of course. Either way, therein lies the accurate history, even if you opine that the death blow of 1978 was immediately effective and so-called ISKCON completely triumphed at that time. Either way, by the mid-80s, what appeared to be Prabhupada's Hare Krishna movement was a perverted reflection of the real thing, which was then killed, scattered, and lost. I engage in withering criticism against the perverted reflections, yet I simultaneously offer a positive alternative. Everyone can see that I engage in destructive criticism as far as so-called ISKCON is concerned, yet we do not simply dovetail the negativity. The Vaishnava Foundation offers positive seva opportunities for its members in good standing. It has allies, it has patrons, and these friends recognize the service it is engaged in. Destructive criticism and its concomitant preaching which successfully works to expose the deviations and check the momentum of a pseudo-devotional scam, that constitutes positive service to the Guru Parampara. In summary, We are against the perverted reflection of ISKCON.
You have spent decades uncompromisingly exposing systemic falsehoods and deviations within the post-1977 institutional structure of the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation. Because of this bold stance, have you ever been personally targeted, harassed, or threatened by the leaders of that fabrication?
To some degree, I've been threatened. Certainly, I've been harassed on countless occasions, most of these assaults on the astral plane. Aggressive leaders of institutional delusions generally do not allow people outside of the cult to know their targets even within it. They do not allow this to become common knowledge. It could only work to hurt them in the long run if they did so. If once loyal members privy to the details of such intrigues leave the cult and work against it, they could provide testimony in court which would severely hurt their former leaders. I was de facto and specifically ostracized in the spring of 1979 by the vitiated GBC. Those leaders knew it well that psychic harassment, at a bare minimum, would follow such condemnation, and certainly it did. Figuratively, I was made radioactive. This played out not just within the organization's circles, but outside, amongst former members also. Things tightened up when I became more effective in my preaching, when I was able to spread the message that the appointment that never was is a colossal hoax, which I did not yet know at the time of a previous death threat. I was harassed, targeted, and threatened with violence about as much as you could have expected. Once the assassin of Sulochan was apprehended in a 1 in 1,000 circumstance arranged by the Paramatma in Kent, Ohio, it became clear to all of the air quotes ISKCON leaders that they better not stretch the rubber band by putting out hits. If they are cursing me, which is almost certain, that harassment has stayed at the astral level. This should not be misinterpreted to mean that I do not keep my intuitive antennae up, because I am more or less always ready for some kind of assault on some level from my enemies. I do not allow it to minimize the intensity of my output in preaching against the deviants. They know this, and my intensity keeps increasing. At this point, they ignore me and tolerate my activities, despite the fact that I did, in the mid-80s, take a center away from them. If murdering someone like Sulochan, who was not following the bhakti process or its restrictions, could still boomerang, and the assassin apprehended by circumstantial massive luck, it minimizes the chance of any more of the leaders taking such risks. A wing of so-called ISKCON, under the so-called authorization of the Moundsville Compound's leader, did take that risk in the mid-80s. It came back to destroy both the hitter and his guru. If you are targeted and harassed, you have to learn how to deal with curses.
You are encamped in the Indian centers of Swami Narayan in Mathura and the sannyasi godbrother Gaura Govinda in Bhubaneswar. What was your experience of them in their association? As he is claimed by his current followers, could Swami Narayan have been the natural successor to Śrīla Prabhupāda? What about Gaura Govinda?
Swami Narayan was Gaudiya Mutt. I stayed with him at his Keshavaji Mutt in Mathura from mid-October of 1983 until sometime in January. When I arrived there, I had previously, in August of that year, sent via Western Union a donation to him of $300. Although he was informed of it, he never retrieved or redeemed it. This despite the fact that he had many favorable connections, particularly with politicians in New Delhi, and he traveled there quite regularly. It wasn't far away. The first seva he gave me was to return to New Delhi, where I had just landed, retrieve that money, and bring it back to him in rupees. He then put me up in a room in the basement. The basement was under renovation. Its air was thick with fine particles of construction detritus. I soon got sick, what to speak of the dysentery I picked up within a few days, which was always the case whenever I went to India. He later informed me that he wanted me to suffer. I also caught a really nasty cold. Perhaps it was borderline pneumonia. It gets frigid in northern India in late November and especially in December. He took me on a parikram via a donkey-driven rickshaw in November, although I was blowing my nose constantly. I then saw that he had all kinds of loose friends in that area who greeted him in a very congenial way. None of them showed any of the markings of Vaishnava. He had one other even closer friend, however, who did not have that Western dress and did have Vaishnava markings. These two were very tight. It was the notorious Parvat Swami. That so-called sannyasi was a disciple of another guru who was a godbrother of Swami Narayan's guru, Swami Narayan's guru being Bhakti Pragyana Keshava Swami. Parvat twisted my arm in order to have me agree to accompany him on a rickshaw to some remote property he had purchased just outside of the Mathura jurisdiction. He was recruiting me to be one of his disciples for the temple he was proposing to build on it. He criticized Prabhupada in many ways during this trip, trying to convince me that Prabhupada was held in very low esteem by his guru, who Prabhupada, a junior godbrother of that guru, served under for a very brief time at the New Delhi Gaudiya Mutt. Referring to Prabhupada, Parvat would interject, "But he could not accomplish anything." It was a stunning example of a complete lack of judgment in respect to recent Gaudiya history. No disciple of Siddhanta Sarasvati was able to do anything comparable to what Prabhupada accomplished. Prabhupada accomplished much, much more than what all of his other godbrothers produced combined. All of this caused me to have doubts about Swami Narayan. I once attempted to ask him some basic philosophical questions, but he made it clear that he was uneasy with that. The one he did answer proved out to be wrong in due course, but it took me a lot of time to discover that fact. Over and above this, we would clean up together in the early morning. He did answer one question I asked him at the shower. I asked him whether or not we were ever in the spiritual world. His verbatim answer was, "We have never been there." This, as you know, contradicts what Prabhupada preached in this connection. Nevertheless, I was adjusting and gradually regaining my health. Swami Narayan made it clear to me that he did not approve of how Swami B.R. Sridhar Swami was dealing with the, air quotes, ISKCON leaders. As you may remember, a major schism had gone down just a year and a half previous to this visit of mine to Mathura. In a raised voice, Swami Narayan said to me, quote, "Even if Lord Chaitanya appeared to me and told me to accept how he's referring here to Swami B.R. Sridhar, he is dealing with ISKCON, I would not do so," unquote. Think about that statement for a moment. I was advised, or you could say ordered, to write a letter to some leader of Neobat in West Bengal to see if they would consider whether or not I could join them. I had no such inclination. There was no feedback, which neither surprised nor disappointed me. One afternoon, out of the blue, I was summoned to the second floor inside veranda of his center. Swami Narayan was sitting with Puri Maharaj from Jagannath Puri. He was one of the few godbrothers of Bhakti Pragyana Keshava Swami still living. Along with these two were 3 leaders of so-called ISKCON. Word had gotten out that I had bivouacked at the Swami Center in Mathura, and so-called ISKCON wanted that nipped. I was invited last to this conclave, and the reason for that was not at all difficult to discern. So-called ISKCON was trying to convince Swami Narayan that I should not be allowed to stay there. One of those men was stressing that I had not been forced to leave ISKCON, but I had done so on my own accord. They wanted me to move back. They wanted me to move back into Ramanreti. Swami Narayan was not even slightly disagreeable to this suggestion. He was amenable to it, and he made no effort to defend my remaining there with him at his mutt. I had no inclination to return to Ramanreti for many reasons. Yeah, they probably knew this, so if I did not agree to that idea, they proposed backup plans. One was that I travel to Bhubaneswar and stay at that center under construction there. It was being run by Gaura Govinda Swami, who was highly favorable to Gaudiya Mutt. He had many connections with both it and Neo-Mutt leaders, Neo-Mutt, so Gaudiya Mutt and Neo-Mutt. He associated with them more than he did so-called ISKCON, although he still remained a representative of so-called ISKCON. Now, if that suggestion was not accepted, I was to take shelter of Puri Maharaj at his ashram in Jagannath Puri. In other words, Swami Narayan had agreed with the local, air quotes, ISKCON leaders in Ramanreti that I was no longer to stay at his center in Mathura. He had acquiesced to their politics. After that, I could no longer look up to him after the cumulative effects of all of this. I gave it a go, and he came up short. He was not a representative of Prabhupada, and that was certain. He once said, as if he were making a prediction, that he would give me sannyas. That day was never going to take place if I had any say in it. However, it is wrong to conclude that I left Uttar Pradesh and headed to Bhubaneswar and Jagannath Puri disappointed, that I left there with a bitter taste in my mouth. I had realized what I needed to learn, and I had paid the price via direct experience. Those experiences proved helpful to me in the intermediate and long term, and frankly, in some ways, I cashed in on them. As far as Gaura Govinda is concerned, I stayed with him for just a short time, about a week in Bhubaneswar. To say that he was a major disappointment is a massive understatement. I found nothing at all attractive about him. His bevy of adoring young boys was obnoxious. His lectures were at the ABCD level without the CD. The one philosophical reply from one question that I asked him turned out to be mistaken knowledge. And there was another factor, too. His face was eerie. Half of it was white, but the upper half was very dark. He played so-called ISKCON and Gaudiya Mutt against one another as it suited his purposes. I have no doubt that he accepted Gaudiya Mutt cum Neo-Mutt teachings. His dealings with me were minimal, and we both wanted it that way. He allowed me to stay there only because Swami Narayan and Puri Maharaj had convinced him to take me in. Those who today opine that he was some kind of saint are just as wrong as those who claim that Swami Narayan was Prabhupada's successor in our line of disciplic succession. The vibration I got from my contact with Gaura Govinda is that he was an expert politician cloaked in pucca saffron. He cut quite the profile.
How did you come in contact with Sulochen? How much influence did you have on his book, eventually entitled The Guru Business?
I was in Houston in the first half of 1985 after having returned from India the previous year and having moved there in September of 1984. A funny thing about memory. Some long-term memory can be vivid, And on the other hand, some of it can be completely wiped out, the synapses broken over time. Such is the case connected to my first contact with Sulochen, but it was when I was living in Houston that the first contact was made, that's for certain. We decided to link up, and I don't remember how, and we wound up in Gopa Vṛndāpal's parking lot in Santa Cruz during the summer of 1985, where we worked on his fledgling manuscript for a book yet untitled. Word processing was just becoming available at that time, and it was certainly a step up from the manual typewriter, let me tell you. Now, he had purchased a new Commodore, which was arguably the best in its class. Typing up the work and then printing it out on his first-class printer assisted my editing of his very rough draft. He had some major misconceptions, and he was not chanting any rounds. He was a bodybuilder, very good-looking, and a womanizer whenever he wanted to be, although neither of us were engaged in that way during this period at Santa Cruz. He was also into intoxication of all varieties, but while I was with him, he was not so engaged. While we worked together, he began chanting 8 rounds per day. His grudge was focused on Kirtanananda. He was thinking that the GBC, pressured by everything he would expose in his book, could be forced to take action against Kirtanananda. This was wrong thinking, and I convinced him that the vitiated GBC was the actual root source of all of his problems. As such, he modified his writing to reflect this, mixing criticism of the governing body and the current, air quotes, ISKCON gurus with condemnation of Kirtanananda. His second major misconception was in relation to Līlamrita, the contaminated biography of Prabhupada. I pointed out that it minimized Prabhupada and glorified, sometimes surreptitiously, the GBC in the process. It has, near the end of the book, it has Prabhupada saying, even I must follow the GBC. How can you imagine that? I had contributed to a position paper in 1981 which focused on this theme about Līlamrita with numerous quotes from that 6-volume work. One morning, Sulochen had his eureka moment, and he told me his realization. He explained how the goal of Līlamrita was to make Prabhupada out as a guru who is basically the same as the 11 great pretenders. This realization fired him up to condemn that biography, and that criticism then worked its way into his manuscript. An elder godbrother of ours, Bhakta Das, had smuggled the letters out of the vault in Los Angeles, and Sulochen, who was gregarious and very friendly with many devotees, made copies of those letters given to him by his friend. This was the basis of his manuscript, which badly needed editing. He recruited me as his editor, although I was not accredited in his book because we had a falling out previous to its publication. I had significant influence on his book. It would not have been very professionally produced had it not been for my editing. Sometimes I cut down long, wordy commentaries to their essences, in one case, culminating in one hard-hitting sentence only in the commentary. I also gave him chapter titles such as ISKCON, the greatest show bottle on earth.
What were your reasons and goals for establishing the Vaishnava Foundation?
As the saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. I was de facto kicked out of the Berkeley Center in the early summer of 1986. A small group of us, one of whom, a younger fellow, was devoted to me, rented a 1-story house in Lafayette, an eastern suburb of the Bay Area. In late August, the strain of 2 unmarried men living in the same house with 2 married couples could no longer be sustained. A proposal was made that I and my younger companion shift our residence to the Mount Kailāsa retreat in the mountains of Lake County, about an hour and 1/2 north of the Bay Area. It was semi-independent from the GBC And that man controlled, the GBC man, controlled both San Francisco and Berkeley. I was well received at Mount Kailasa by its president, who had been impressed by what he had read in The Guru Business, the title of Sulochan's book. However, from direct experience with Sulochan, he had a very negative impression of him and intuited that his book, which he published, which this fellow, the president, had read thoroughly, must have been created mostly by someone else who was more spiritually advanced. He had, just before I came to Berkeley in March of that year, found out that I was its editor and chief writer. The directors of Mount Kailasa were sharply divided. And, compounding that situation, the whole operation was in very deep debt. There was a major lawsuit which would, once adjudicated, certainly be lost. It had no chance of winning. An egregious and obvious transgression had occurred, sexual aggression, in which Mount Kailasa would no doubt be ruled responsible, and it would certainly bankrupt the community, which had no reliable source of income for some time. Its board of directors consisted of three men, two of whom predominated it and were in semi-hostile camps. One of those camps was centered far from Lake County in California. It was in Southern California. Now, the third director was an absentee board member, an unwilling placeholder inserted by the governing body commissioner of the Bay Area. That air quotes ISKCON commissar, a wealthy man from Iran, was gradually manipulating a takeover of Mount Kailasa, claiming, promising that he would extinguish the compound's huge debts if it would just allow him one more appointee on the board of directors. I was approved to move there with my younger friend, although there was tension involved in that decision. After that, I could recognize what was going down. As such, I urged the other two directors to remove the placeholder. And that fellow signed off because he had no interest in being a director in the first place. This leveled the playing field to what it had been before the takeover attempt, which obviously was aborted. The Bay Area Commissioner's man, the man who was working under the commissar, who was supposed to become the fourth director, and he was at Mount Kailasa, he immediately vacated Mount Kailasa as soon as we got rid of the placeholder director and as soon as I moved in. Making a long saga as concise as possible, after two other departures by those who were unfavorable to me, I and the temple president, who was a sannyasi, formed an unincorporated entity in order to control the finances which our men, including that temple president, collected daily. We named it the Vaishnava Foundation. We maintained the operation of the rural compound through our collections, but whatever was left over was deposited in our bank account, our own bank account. That president, who was one of the directors, now two of them only now, soon gave up his saffron status, as well as the name he had been given by one of the 11 great pretenders, and that great pretender was Hanksaduta, as it came to be, who formerly was in control of both the Bay Area temples as well as Mount Kailasa. The saga of Mount Kailasa is very long, and that will not be described. The board was expanded to 4, although it was just as divided as before when it was expanded in this way. And I was added to it later when one of the men on our side decided to leave Mount Kailasa. There was a great deal of intrigue involved in this, however, as you can well imagine. Mount Kailasa went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. However, I found a competent attorney in Ukiah to represent us in that aforementioned ominous lawsuit, which we had no hope of winning. Fortunately for us, his investigation uncovered that the Berkeley Center had taken out an insurance policy for both Berkeley and Mount Kailasa conjointly. We were able to settle with the insurance company covering a large and deserved payment to the young man who was the victim in the lawsuit. So that was a great relief. There was now a chance, but still, the board was heavily divided and we had outstanding huge debt. The creditors were pressuring for their money. So we concluded we had to sell the property, although I did make an offer to the other side of the board as an alternative to selling. After the sale of the property and paying off creditors, the agreed upon plan, which was agreed upon previous to the sale and paying off the creditors, was to divide the remaining monetary assets after the sales and payoff into 2 donations to 2 separate nonprofit corporations created by each side of the board, separate from Mount Kailasa. Now, just previous to this, as the assaults were constant on us from every angle imaginable, we also had to fend off a lawsuit filed by Hangsadutta, which cost us $13,000. We won that case on the merits and on more potent testimony, but we also won it on a technicality related to the promissory note, which was the basis of the plaintiffs filing the lawsuit in the beginning. And I considered it a frivolous lawsuit, of course, but in California you can get away with it. Once our realtor put the property up for sale, our attorney in that Hangsadutta case arranged for one of his buddies to draft a bare-bones document, 1-pager, a purchase offer. Never seen one of those before. However, in making this offer, that attorney, and he was personally unfavorable to me, failed to recognize that Mount Kailasa had property in not just Lake County, but also 13 acres in adjoining Mendocino County. But in that bare-bones purchase offer, the acres in Mendocino County were not listed. And so our board was willing to accept, and we did accept. This wound up netting us an extra $13,000, which was both fitting and justified. Nevertheless, before the sale was finalized, I made an offer to the other side of the board that we would move our operation there to those Mendocino acres and continue running Mount Kailasa. And, I should have expected this, but I didn't, the other side did not form its own nonprofit corporation. We did, the Vaishnava Foundation. I incorporated the Vaishnava Foundation on January 20th, 1988 in Sacramento with the other director on the Mount Kailasa board at that time, a younger godbrother. We were on one side, the others were on the other 2. And I did so without the aid of an attorney. I drew up all of the documentation required and my work was approved. As mentioned at the beginning of this answer, the Vaishnava Foundation was formed out of necessity for not only separate collection, but also due to an eventual legal split of assets. And that split took place after escrow closed. Now that's a long story because it didn't just involve money, but I'm not going to get into it except a little bit. The other side of the board, we had no alternative. It was a force play. We had to allow them to keep legal control of Mount Kailasa. Because what could be done? Yet to say that what has just been described is the only reason for formulating and forming the Vaishnava Foundation would be many bridges too far. The Vaishnava Foundation has accomplished a lot since Mount Kailasa ran its course in late 1988. We have produced many powerful articles, videos, audios, and YouTube shorts over the years. We have recruited members and kept a handful of them. Although the attrition rate has been high, this spiritual entity has been on firm ground for quite some time now, decades. And it has many dedicated members. It was meant to accomplish much in an area which almost none of my godbrothers dared to tread. It exposes all the bogus so-called Kṛṣṇa groups in painstaking detail. It has produced the only accurate narrative. It has 2 functioning websites. It offers a positive alternative to the 3 chief groups. deviant groups, advocating that they represent the Guru Parampara when in point of fact they most certainly do not. In checking the momentum of the largest and the most powerful of those groups, which is, of course, the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, if you come to the Vaishnava Foundation, you can expect to receive knowledge that you would otherwise be unable to access. And if you accept that knowledge and act upon it, seva, you can convert that into realized wisdom as you continue to follow us by joining us. You can expect clarity that is available nowhere else, especially about the real narrative of Prabhupada's branch of the Kṛṣṇa movement, and also in terms of the science of self-realization. You can also expect to feel the defiance this organization projects against the Sahaja groups that have and continue to mislead thousands of innocent people. The Vaishnava Foundation is steady. We move with intelligent deliberation. Our reasons for forming this organization are bona fide. We have survived a fire of ordeal, only a small part of which has been communicated here. One of our goals is to ultimately nip the influence of the 3 Sahaja groups that are covering Krishna consciousness in the name of spreading it. Our motto is, in like a pin, out like a plow.
For many years, you have been able to penetrate the illusions created by Sahaja deviants and provide the real explanation of all of that to fortunate individuals. In your opinion, what has given you the strength and insight to accomplish such an important task?
Aside from mental and spiritual strength provided by sadhana and the mercy of Parameshvara and the demigods who favor you, whatever you do a lot of, you get good at. Making muscles during bodybuilding depends upon the known principle that slightly tearing muscles, they'll soon heal to make them both larger and stronger. Once the zonal ācārya imposition went down, I figured something was off about it. I did not know in detail how it deviated, not at first, but I was inclined to be opposed to it immediately. My intuition proved to be right. The question was at that time whether I was willing to keep it to myself or act upon it by preaching against it. On the other hand, was I willing to give the zonal imposition a chance? Turns out I was not. Then, from a personal perspective, how to proceed? The answer to this question, to a significant degree, was made for me in terms of the so-called service I was given by my governing body commissioner at that time. Short term, it was spiritually ultra terrible. However, it cannot be judged in that way from a higher perspective. It put me in a position to jettison from the, air quotes, ISKCON movement, which meant breaking away from having any connection with the 11 great pretenders. My svabhava combines, downline, the determination of the intelligence with some writing and speaking acumen. The luck factor played a part as well. Without knowing that such would be the case, I walked into situations that were conducive, read lucky, in order to find out just what was going down in the movement and why at that time. It is also a fact that most of the leaders of ISKCON handled me in such a way that it became almost inevitable that I'd turn against them. There are no do-overs. However, there were circumstances where if I had been handled differently and accommodations been made, I may have gone along to some limited extent with the imposition. As one possible example, I may have become integral to that mid-80s event from Natpa if I had been favored by the non-guru leaders. But I wasn't. I wasn't favored by any of them. I was ostracized. I was de facto excommunicated. It was to my spiritual advantage that they did not handle me well. Although 2 or 3 of them were helpful to me to some extent, even in the early 80s, I was grateful to them. But all those men were second echelon. As such, when push came to shove, they got shoved. As far as insight is concerned, I do pick up the motivation of others very quickly, sometimes instantly. As far as strength is concerned, I'm not without it. Specifically, I'm strong when I'm attacked. I boxed a bit in high school, and although not a good puncher, I was adept at counterpunching. When you have the Saturn and Mars that I have in my Janma Kundali, you fight. This includes survival techniques when applicable. As per that common aphorism, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Although this is a relative truth and is not always the case, it has mostly been the case for me during my many years of ordeal. All devotees in our branch of the Guru Parampara are dependent upon the mercy and protection of its most recent Sampradaya ācārya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. We are also dependent upon the Parameshvara. We are dependent upon Srimati Radharani, as this disciplic succession, especially since Lord Chaitanya, has the personality of bhakti as its chief feature, unlike most of the other lines, frankly unlike all of them. But that's an in-depth explanation. I brought into this life, from both the causal and astral planes, my own mix of the 3 modes, my own karma, and my own daiva or destiny. Some of what I am, or what I've become over time, can be dovetailed to what I've chosen, or from another perspective, what was chosen for me as my chief seva since the late 70s. In conclusion, I'm not only the best at what I do, I'm the only one who does what I do.
As I understand your history, you were a skilled writer even before you entered the Hare Krishna movement. This could explain why you have been able to write such excellent, groundbreaking books, the recent being On Consciousness and the Perfection of Man. After reading this book, I gained a much deeper and comprehensive understanding of what exactly happened to the movement. What would you say makes this book so powerful?
It covers ground that no one else has covered. It also is the most granular explanation of the exchange between the 2 sannyasis and Prabhupada in his quarters at Raman Reti in late May of 1977. That was said to be a quote-unquote appointment tape, although there was no appointment contained in that botched interview whatsoever. My detailed explanation of how that Q&A went down covers all of the bases. It can be consulted by any transcendentalist to advantage. It is now on the record. It is likely that it'll stay there for a very long time, because my explanation is lucid. That clarity was and is sorely wanted, and now it has been provided to all. There can be no mystical, obtuse, opaque, or allegedly inconceivable explanation that can stand against it, as long as enough honest men and women read that chapter, assimilate its message, and spread the facts and truths of that real explanation. Each chapter of my book contains detailed discussions of the topic taken up by that chapter. As far as being a skilled writer is concerned, I certainly had to work at it. My earlier written treatises are inferior to what I've produced in the last decade or so. I'm enthusiastic about writing when it comes to helping my fellow travelers on the theistic Eastern path overcome obstacles thrown up against them in the name of Krishna Consciousness. I was a writer, as previously mentioned, in both high school and college. I won a regional award for a short story in high school, I was sent to a 2-week summer specialty program in Madison for budding journalists from 5 Midwest states between my sophomore and junior years in high school. I later received a full-ride scholarship upon entering University of Wisconsin. However, I know what I was. I was nothing more than an above-average writer during any of that time frame. Managing a devotional community online and producing videos, audios, and YouTube shorts requires tenacity in the area of both writing and forensics. It requires much more than that, obviously, but I'm simply answering here the specific question asked. In the service of my Guru Maharaj, it was and remains my duty to become an accomplished communicator. If you want to be excellent in any area, you must never be completely satisfied with your output. Instead, you must strive to continue to improve in that area. I do that, and it has shown some positive results. One of my godbrothers many years ago, just after the turn of the century, said that what I was trying to do is the most difficult task possible. He was referring to the fact that none of the members of our organization has ever met me in person. Indeed, none of the current members even lives in the United States. Yet all of them, herein asking questions, are very devoted to the Vaishnava Foundation and to myself. This is in no small part due to communication skills between myself and each of them. Writing in the form of treatises and my many books are part of that endeavor and accomplishment. But it should never be concluded that I'm a spontaneous writer. I edit my work constantly in order to improve it. I edited my last book about 3 times over, but it still needed further editing by the great son of one of our organization's members in order to bring it up to the standard. The book, having some power of influence, is due to its being professionally and clearly written, well-researched, and organized as an honest presentation. We are all transmitters of various universal energies and principalities, both good and evil, or as far as our group is concerned, transcendentally good, Shuddha Sattva, as per the working principles of Buddha Yoga. We are responsible for our individual influence. We are responsible for dovetailing our abilities to the cause of the absolute truth. If and or when we do so, then there's going to be some power intrinsic and integral to what we write or communicate.
Do you have many friends who help you carry out the mission of the Vaishnava Foundation? On the other side of the coin, do you have many enemies who undermine you in carrying out your mission?
I have more enemies than friends, that's certain. However, I do have some very devoted friends. Indeed, they can be considered either followers or disciples according to their own assessment of their relationship with me. Be ye hot, or be ye cold, but if thee be lukewarm, I shall spew thee from mine mouth. And indeed, I have a hot nemesis. There is no need to name him, but he has caused much harm to me over the decades by engaging in potent character assassination and spreading it widely. Paradoxically, he has helped me in a major way. Twice, actually. Both are appreciated, although the harm he has caused me by running me through the grease and making me radioactive, figuratively of course, via slanders, lies, half-truths, innuendos, and rumors, that's not appreciated. I do not praise my enemies, but I'm going to also mention his help here. He was part of that group which congregated at Mount Kailāsa in the 4th week of August 1986 and approved the president's proposal that I move up there from my domicile in Lafayette. I could tell during that meeting that he was skeptical of voting for me to move into the Mount Kailāsa ashram, but he did vote for it. After that, the contingent from the Bay Area was adamantly opposed to how I was conducting my mission in the service to my Guru Maharaj at Mount Kailāsa, but the toothpaste was already out of the tube. They gave me a foothold, and they gave me a service, and I exploited the opportunity. When opportunity knocks, be there. I found an expert and effective attorney that each of them assigned me to find, and I took it from there as I saw fit. That godbrother then became my nemesis over time, but even while he became so, he later helped me in another way. The Kṛṣṇa Foundation got online early in the game, in the mid-90s. My nemesis was also on the internet early, and his website became popular very quickly, much more than ours. For a brief time, the Kṛṣṇa Foundation had only 2 dedicated members. However, on the website of my godbrother nemesis, he reproduced and provided a hyperlink to our online IP address. Dr. Ernest Dross had come into contact with that godbrother's website. He was researching everything he could to find out about the history of the Hare Krishna movement, particularly after Prabhupada departed physical manifestation. On his own, it is somewhat unlikely he would have contacted our much less known and much less popular website. Maybe, but if so, much later. However, my nemesis provided its hyperlink. Dr. Ernest activated the hyperlink, checked it out, and he accepted the better message, and he joined us. Now, as far as friends go, all of the members in good standing in the Kṛṣṇa Foundation are my friends. I also have allies, and most of them are friends. I also have a few patrons who are friendly. I'm not without friends, but they're not as numerous as my enemies. How could it be otherwise? My preaching is confrontational, and there are many who hate me for it. That's the price you have to be willing to pay after your spiritual master departs, when so many of his leading secretaries deviate and then splinter, forming all kinds of constant internecine wars.
You have predicted a black swan event coming in the near or intermediate future. Do you believe that either you personally or the Kṛṣṇa Foundation might have a direct or an indirect influence over such a coming event?
A black swan is an unknown unknown. However, you can predict in what field the event may appear, but not specifically how it goes down. Then again, predictions can be made which appear to be black swan events, although technically this pun is intended in advance, they are not so. I shall provide one example of each of these. Because I am specifically reproducing it here, the first one cannot be considered a black swan in the true sense of the term. It can be considered like a black swan due to its extremely unlikely odds of actually happening and the major repercussions it would produce if it did go down. It almost certainly will not, so let us call it a gray swan. If one of the still living original zonals came completely clean, admitted to everything, exposed that scam fully, revealed the fact that following it, the second transformation did not actually uproot the nescience that remained present from the first transformation, that would be like a black swan event. It is so unlikely that it can be filed in the category of next to impossible, but it is not actually a black swan. An actual black swan would be different. It cannot be predicted or seen in advance, at least not in the specific way that it plays out. However, you can predict the field or fields in which it transpires, but not the details of how it does so. The field I predict it to arrive in will be relative to the technocracy. I am thinking that the real black swan event can come out of that early on as it takes over the Western world, replacing the nation-state paradigm. How it would do so remains unknown to me and probably to everyone. One thing we can know about it: when it initially takes over, it will do so quickly, and it will be brutal. I should like to add a subcategory to this field of potential black swan event. It may include the interfaith initiative that so-called ISKCON is currently active in. However, going granular in relation to a black swan event is, by definition, not only counterproductive but impossible. If something is impossible to predict, then it is also impossible to predict whether or not the Vaishnava Foundation will be instrumental to it, either just before it or during it or post facto, ex post facto. As I've stated before, when opportunity knocks, be there. If there is an opening for us at any stage of that black swan event, know it for a fact we shall surely take advantage of it. I appreciate all of your excellent questions. Sadeva Samya.